Thank you very much for the opportunity, and again a big welcome to Bexhill and East Sussex. I thought a couple of things I would talk about really with regards to the Health and Wellbeing Board that I chair. And the reason I chair that, in other authorities it has been handed over to adult social care leads or whatever. But we in East Sussex genuinely believe that health and wellbeing is at the centre of what we do. And it's not just in one department, it's across the whole piece. So whether it's adults, children's, even the community and environment team, trips and falls on pavements are as important to us as the cultural needs that exist within the other part of the team. So I think the Health and Wellbeing Board in East Sussex is well placed. We have the right people at the table. I was explaining earlier, we do the business. It's actually on webcast, anyone who's sad enough to have nothing more important to do. But we then break into workshops to look at how we can do things differently. Because I think as part of what today is about how we can look at providing services in a different way. Because I think for so long we've looked at services in a traditional way. I think now, and I'll go on to say a bit more about it, because of austerity, it's more important than it ever has been to ensure that every opportunity to make lives better, to keep people healthier, is taken. I did say, because many of you will know the current financial position that we're in, that I'd just say a few words about the current budget challenges. Many of you will know that since 2010 we've actually taken £78 million out of the running costs of East Sussex County Council. That's on a budget of £350 million. We now find, and assuming that in the autumn statement the Chancellor doesn't change it for the worse, that we've got to save between another 70 and 90 million over the next 3 years. It's not an insignificant challenge. And I think the real difference going forward is that if we don't change the way we work, if we don't work in different ways, work with partners, none of us will succeed. So I just absolutely reinforce the fact that nothing should be off the agenda. But equally, as we set a budget where we're looking next year to take £23 million out of the running costs, I've said to the team, everything should be out there as well, because you can't have red lines. There are bits that we all in this room would want to save. There are bits that would have a different meaning for other people. So a really difficult task, not one that I came into politics to undertake, but if we don't do it, the government will do it for us. So I think it's really important that we understand that we will set a balanced budget, and it will be set on the understanding of the 4 priorities that we set ourselves, and that is to look after the most vulnerable, to get best value for our money, to improve the economy of the council, and the 4th one always escapes me, making best use of our resources. And so all of our deliberations will be judged against that. We do have a very good track record, I think, in East Sussex of working in a different way, and collectively I'm sure we will come through that. But I didn't want to leave here today thinking, anyone in the room thinking everything was rosy and was going to be easy, so we've got some difficult tasks. But going forward, the benefits of art and culture for health and wellbeing is out there for all to see. I first got involved as local member for Rye and Eastern Rother with the setting up of an arts project down in Rye. And you really can't underestimate the value for the people that then have the benefit of not only in being engaged and working on it, but actually of seeing what can be achieved by other people. There are many, many more people in the room better placed than me to talk through that, and I really do hope that the day goes well and you enjoy and participate. I'm sorry to say that for whatever reason my diary only allowed me to be here for the opening of the morning, and I can't join the panel. But with all of this talent in the room, with the tasks and the opportunities that lay ahead, I'm sure that at the end of the day we'll have some really good, useful information coming out of here that will guide us all going forward. So it's my great pleasure now to introduce the chairwoman of the day, Baroness Andrews of Southover. She was the previous chairwoman of English Heritage and is currently still Deputy Speaker of the House, of the House of Lords. So my pleasure to introduce Baroness Andrews. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much, Councillor Glazier. It's really important to have yourself here, actually, the leader of the council. We know how times are very challenging, but I know that from what you said, you understand that the arts and culture play a massive and very proactive and creative role in helping you to solve some of the problems which you see on a day-to-day basis across the policy areas. So I hope very much, actually, that we can collectively be a resource for the County Council in many different ways. And it's provided, what you've said, provided a very helpful context for what I will say about my own work in Wales. Just to thank Nick Eubank first, actually, for giving me the opportunity to be here today and to actually have the privilege of chairing this conference. I think he scared everyone to death by telling the speakers I was a whip in the House of Lords. So the only person I really have to discipline is myself, actually. Yes, I can't see a clock, and I've got a very small hand on my watch, so I'll do my best. You've got the red card. Yeah, well, don't hesitate to use it on me. Fine. It's a really important conference, actually, and it's a very timely conference for the reasons which were obvious from what Councillor Glazier said. There is a lot of experience and a lot of talent in this room and on the platform. And the day is structured so that there will be a lot of conversation. And I hope there will be conversation in these intervals after the speakers, because we really, really need to pull out the experience and the positive actions that are going on and to share these good ideas, because making a common cause against austerity in culture, where we actually need to show that it's a false economy. And so I'm really interested, I should be really interested in hearing what you all say. Nick was very kind and asked me to talk about my work in Wales in this context. And I didn't need much encouragement because I'm on a bit of a mission here. I've lived in Lewis for 40 years, but when Halon and Gymru, my heart is still in Wales. And therefore, it's when I had a chance to go back to Wales, actually, after I stopped being chair of English Heritage, I took it with both hands because, like many of the Welsh diaspora, we always feel that we haven't actually done the right thing by our own culture. And if there's a chance to do something at this stage of our lives, a lot of us are trying to do that. And the Welsh government asked me to do something which was more radical than I thought they were capable of, because it's a strange, devolved administration in some ways. And although I should be speaking about Wales and well-being and health, in the context of a community resilience, what I say, I hope, will have a real resonance with you and the situations you're facing and the things that you're trying to do. I was in another life a Minister for Regeneration and Planning in the last Labour government, and we did in those days believe passionately in regeneration. And you can see some of the evidence around it, in fact, in the South Coast, in places like Hastings and Margate, although it's a very challenging task. But there was sea change money, for example, and it was the sort of money that went into culture as a very deliberate form of economic sustainability, because we believed that that was actually a very robust form of social and economic regeneration. The approach is different now, but I am heartened that after 4 or 5 years of Conservatives being in government, that we do now have this challenge of a white paper on culture. And I think that Ed Vaizey, the Minister, is a very creative chap, and I think we should all take him at his word and respond as positively as possible. And it is, of course, some of the questions are about how people can engage more effectively with culture, how culture can help to make vibrant and healthy communities. They're good questions, but they're not sufficient questions. And that is where the example of Wales comes in. You do have to think bigger now, for all sorts of reasons. And we have to make more radical demands of government and of the funding that we get and of culture. And I think this conference is an opportunity to do some of that thinking aloud. Wales is a different country, and they do things differently. They've chosen to not adopt a wholly austerity agenda, for example. They've chosen to continue to invest in communities. It is small. It's only 4.5 million people, half the size of London. It's very complicated culturally because it's bilingual. And Wales has been divided historically, north and south, east and west. We've been at war with ourselves for hundreds of years. But there is a very strong sense of local community, a very strong sense of civic responsibility and civic pride. All the national institutions in Wales were democratic institutions. They were all funded through literally the investment of coal miners and slate workers, the great National Museum, the National Library, the national universities. But it's a very poor country now because it's a post-industrial country. And 40% of Welsh communities live below the poverty line, and that's actually increasing rather than decreasing. And these communities are very various. They're not all in South Wales in the old coal and steel communities, but many are. Some of them are in inner city, Cardiff and Swansea. Some of them are in the rural coasts, lines of Rhyl and Denbighshire and Wrexham, and the really very isolated communities of North Wales. These are characterised as community-first areas, and they are places where a huge amount of very intensive intervention has been placed. Investment in things like Sure Start and adult learning and adult training, in health and well-being. And we've also got social organisations in Wales which have taken on a bigger social role than in England, like housing associations, which are often actually involved in literacy work or after-school activities and so on. So we've got a huge challenge of trying to build confidence and identity as well as prosperity in those areas which really feel very left behind. So in July 13, I was asked by the Welsh Government when I'd finished with English Heritage to see whether I could find ways in which in Wales culture and heritage could maximise opportunities to work together so that they could play their part in tackling poverty. What a fantastic question. It was the first time that anyone had made a direct link between what culture can do and what social justice can achieve. And it was a question which really took me into the heart of what was happening in the community development work in Wales in these communities, and also what the cultural agencies were trying to do. Because many of them, as I discovered, had very articulate programs, the sort of things that I heard about on the train this morning from the Pallant Gallery, and the sort of work that is very much actually about bringing the community into the gallery, the community in all its variety. And so there was a lot of work going on all across Wales, and I really, went like a headless chicken across Wales in 5 months, trying to find out what was happening, trying to reflect people's best ambitions back to them. And the really interesting thing is this, that it was the first time this question had been asked. What is the link? What can culture do to address poverty? First time it had been asked anywhere in the UK, and I think, frankly, anywhere in the world, I haven't come across that question being articulated in that form, which is why the report I wrote has gone a bit viral and well beyond Wales. Because the government in Wales thought that since their anti-poverty programme had to be everybody's business, there was no way that arts and culture could be left out and shouldn't be left out. You think of the difference in England, where we have struggled for years to persuade ministers that arts and culture are part of the solution and not something actually which you think, oh God, and we've got to find a bit of money for them too. Anyway, that was the irresistible invitation. I found an enormous range of activity from the very innovative theatre programmes which have been going into communities, the Welsh National Theatre, for example, and Michael Sheen's work in Port Talbot, to the tiny sort of arts-based community programmes which were pulling in really troubled children and very sort of disaffected families. But the cultural agencies knew that they were really scratching at the surface. They were being told by their funders, we want you to go and find the hard to reach, and we want you to try to make a contribution to, opening access. But they didn't know, actually, what was more likely to be effective unless they were very practiced. But by and large, they were not joined up in any way with what was happening with the anti-poverty programs and the community first workers on the ground, let alone the job centres or the health and well-being centres on a systematic basis. And it was also about strengthening the sense of identity and resilience and well-being in the community. This is really important in Wales. English language, I find, is very stiff. I should explain, I don't speak Welsh, I'm learning Welsh, which is why I'm showing off. Anyway, English language, we have heritage, and we have, placemaking and regeneration. They're all terribly stiff words. In Wales, we have this brilliant word called cynefin, which means a sense of belonging in time and place. When you think about it, that's really what culture is about. And it's actually about people finding their way through their past and into their future. Now, what we were trying to do in the seminars that I brokered across Wales, and believe me, they were fantastic, because this was the first time that community first development workers had ever met with archaeologists or museum curators or gallery curators. And they had such a good time in these seminars, because they found out, of course, they were all trying to reach and open doors for the same people in different ways, but they had the same shared objectives without ever having an opportunity to have that conversation before. There was no single conversation, and that was part of the challenge. And it wasn't just about improving outreach, it was about how the community first workers and the families could take advantage of the permanent anchors in the community, anchors like the ones that are here today, the galleries, the museums, the archives, the libraries, all of the institutions which people like us take for granted and enjoy, but which look so forbidding to so many people. So as I went talking around Wales talking, what I found, of course, was that there was a tremendous disconnect. There was huge amounts of work going on in terms of shared but unarticulated objectives. There was no joining up of policy at national level from social policy across to cultural policy, let alone on the ground. So, for example, you'd have a library which was doing fantastic work with reading challenges for adults and children, but completely unconnected with the Sure Start programme down the road, where the community workers were doing very much the same thing, but with inadequate resources and no training. Or you'd get a volunteer programme in a local archives, which was really putting young people on the path to new careers, but in fact had absolutely no links with job search, which could have really maximised opportunities. So it was about making those connections and embedding them. And there was all the local historic assets, places like this, but also places like old miners' institutes and old cinemas and so on, things that were often idle or underused, empty, or just on the point of dereliction, which could have been used as an asset in the community and weren't being. Then we had the separation of schools from what was going on, local history societies, local archaeological societies, all capable, for example, of enriching the history curriculum, the Welsh Baccalaureate, which is project-based, so much that could have been linked into the schools in school and out of school. And then the heritage and the cultural agencies weren't joined up. So the local Cadw, which is English heritage in Wales, Cadw would have a wonderful light show on, say, in Blaenavon, in the old ironworks, but that wouldn't be connected up at all to any of the sort of public art or the sort of interpretation which local artists and local galleries could have added into it. So it was all about connectivity. And do you recognise this picture? Yes? Right. Failure to capitalise on either the learning or the skills agenda, failure to make links with job markets or career trends, failure to link with schools for extra enrichment and motivation, failure to build in arts and cultural programmes into economic and social policy. I'm sorry Councillor Glazier went, because I think he might have begun to get the point, I think, if he'd stayed at this point. So my recommendations were about 3 areas of work: how to embed culture and the work and the resources of the cultural agencies inside the Community First programs, not to make them more instrumental, not to lose the point of excellence, but to make them accessible and to enrich them in the process. Recommendations for arts, culture and heritage to be more mainstreamed into learning and motivation, whether it's children or adults, and across volunteering and skills programs, and new policy and strategic initiatives to drive impact forward across policy nationally and locally. I recommended a cultural and social inclusion board at the top of policy making. Whereas that's been established. In fact, the whole report has been implemented. I recommended new bridge building at local level, what were called community and culture networks with joint chairmanships with culture and creativity. There are 6 networks now called fusion areas, which are pioneering the 33 separate recommendations of the report. These are in Torfaen, Newport, Cardiff, Wrexham, Swansea and Gwynedd. They're all doing slightly different things. They're all working with national partners. And I'll give you one very short example because I'm running out of time. In Torfaen, for example, only one element of this programme now is working with Torfaen is one of the valley areas. The Congress Theatre in Pontypool. Pontypool Museum is working with 20 teenagers to develop democratic participation across a range of issues. Literature Wales is working there with younger children. The local FE college is working on a drama project which is going to be based at Tretower Court, which is one of the medieval houses in Wales. The Digital Heritage Station is involved now, offering accreditation for digital work. The National Library is coming from Aberystwyth to run Cynefin belonging workshops. The Able Radio is running media courses. And so it goes on. Other places are doing things to bring in the university. The university is leading the partnership in Cardiff. It's creating a very, very comprehensive heritage project which actually runs all across the valleys and into Cardiff, areas which historically have been very hostile. It's all happening, and the interesting thing is it's infectious. It's like measles. So places which haven't got fusion projects are saying, well, we don't actually have to have fusion projects. We can actually imitate them. And it's happening in places which are quite unlikely. It's really, really interesting. There aren't any new resources. People are sharing resources, diverting resources, pooling resources. It can work. I think it's a replicable model. Anyway, that's what's all I want to say. And I really, really, really look forward to hearing everybody else today and getting your ideas.